Nobody notices the moment their life changes. They only notice everything that came before it. Ethan Carter stared at the sealed nutrition pack resting in his hands as the lights of Port Meridian Station shimmered across its silver surface. The package weighed less than a pound, yet it felt heavier than anything he had carried all month. Maybe because it was the last thing he truly owned. Beyond the observation windows, starships drifted through the darkness like floating cities, their engine trails painting pale blue streaks across the endless black. Cargo freighters arrived. Passenger liners departed. Thousands of lives moved forward. Ethan felt like the only person standing still. The overhead speakers announced another departure in a calm mechanical voice. Somewhere below, docking clamps released with a deep metallic groan that vibrated through the station floor. The familiar sounds of machinery and commerce filled the air. Normally, he found comfort in them. Tonight, they only reminded him that he no longer belonged here. His employee badge had been deactivated 3 days ago. His maintenance contract had expired. His housing permit would end at sunrise. 34 years old. 12 years repairing power grids, life support systems, and structural conduits. And now he was one missed paycheck away from sleeping in transit corridors. Ethan leaned back against the bench and watched travelers pass. Families, merchants, pilots, wealthy tourists carrying luggage that probably cost more than everything he owned. Nobody looked at him. Nobody cared. In a place this large, people learned to ignore strangers. He understood why. If you stopped for every sad story in the galaxy, you would never reach your destination. His stomach tightened painfully. He looked down at the nutrition pack again. 900 calories. Enough to get through one more day. Maybe. He released a slow breath and started peeling back the wrapper. Then he noticed her. At first, she was just another figure among hundreds. A young alien woman sitting alone beneath a towering holographic advertisement. But something about her drew his attention. Maybe it was the stillness. Everyone else was moving. She was not. The advertisement above her displayed rotating images of expensive meals from restaurants scattered across the station. Grilled seafood, fresh fruit, hot soups, luxury desserts. The girl never looked away from the images. She wore an oversized gray jacket that hid most of her frame. A worn travel bag rested beside her feet. Her blue skin stood out against the cold metallic surroundings, and even from a distance Ethan could see exhaustion in her posture. Travelers flowed around her like water around a stone. Nobody stopped. Nobody spoke. Nobody even glanced her way. Ethan frowned. Something felt wrong. Not dangerous. Just sad. The station lights shifted as a departing transport moved beyond the observation windows. For a brief moment the light illuminated her face beneath the hood. Silver eyes. Delicate features unlike any human he had ever seen. Beautiful in a way that felt completely alien. And hungry. He knew that look. He had seen it in the mirror more than once. Ethan lowered the nutrition pack. Across the concourse, the girl continued staring at food she could not buy. Neither of them knew it yet, but within 48 hours entire fleets would cross the stars searching for her. At that moment, however, she was not an heir, a symbol, or the center of a galactic crisis. She was simply a hungry girl sitting alone in a crowded station. And Ethan Carter was holding the only meal he had left. The storm had not eased by morning. It pressed against the outpost walls with a low, endless moan, like the planet itself refusing to sleep. Frost crawled across the observation windows in delicate silver veins. Inside, warm air hummed through aging vents. Ethan sat near a maintenance console, sleeves rolled up, hands blackened with lubricant and dust. A half-disassembled power regulator rested across his knees. He worked slowly, patiently, the way a man repaired things when replacement parts were impossible to find. Every few seconds, the old machine answered with a metallic click. It was a conversation he understood better than most. Beyond the reinforced glass, white snow drifted across the valley. The distant mountains had vanished behind a curtain of ice crystals. The colony sat alone at the edge of mapped space. Most people called it a dead posting. Ethan called it home. The coffee beside him had already gone cold. He drank it anyway. A soft chime echoed through the room. One of the environmental sensors had detected movement beyond the outer perimeter fence. Ethan glanced at the display. A small red marker blinked against the storm map. Probably another ice crawler searching for heat. They appeared every winter. Usually harmless. Usually. He stood, stretched the stiffness from his shoulders, and pulled on a weather jacket. The outer airlock opened with a hiss. Wind immediately clawed at him. Tiny shards of ice stung his face. The world outside was little more than shifting white shadows. Ethan followed the sensor beacon through knee-deep snow. The signal flickered again. Closer now. Something dark lay partially buried near a collapsed communications tower. At first he thought it was wreckage. Then it moved. Ethan froze. The shape was too large for local wildlife. Too still for a machine. He stepped closer. The storm parted for a single moment. Orange skin. Copper-colored hair tangled with ice. A figure. Alive. Barely. Golden eyes open halfway. They focused on him with immediate suspicion. Even exhausted, the stranger carried an air of authority. Pride. The kind that survived long after strength had faded. Ethan raised both hands. Slowly. Easy, he said. I am not here to hurt you. The translator clipped to his collar struggled for a second before producing the words in galactic standard. The alien woman's gaze narrowed. Her lips parted. A few weak syllables emerged. The translator caught only fragments. Warning. Leave. Dangerous. Ethan glanced at the worsening storm overhead. Visibility was dropping fast. The temperature had already fallen another 10 degrees. Staying here meant death for anyone, human or otherwise. He looked back at her. You can threaten me after you survive the weather. For the first time, something unexpected crossed her expression. Confusion. As if the answer violated some rule she had spent her entire life believing. Ethan carefully removed his thermal cloak and wrapped it around her shoulders. The fabric looked absurdly small against her taller frame. Still, she gripped it tightly. Neither spoke for a moment. Wind screamed around the broken tower. Snow swirled between them. Then Ethan offered his hand. Not as a soldier. Not as a negotiator. Just as a man helping someone stand. The alien stared at the gesture. Long enough for fresh snow to settle across both of them. Finally, slowly, she accepted. The climb back to the colony took nearly 40 minutes. Snow hammered against them from every direction. The wind howled through broken antenna structures and abandoned mining equipment scattered across the frozen ridge. Ethan walked slightly ahead, one hand shielding his face while the other steadied the emergency lantern clipped to his belt. Behind him, the alien woman moved with stubborn determination. Every step looked painful. Every step she took anyway. The thermal cloak dragged against the drifting snow around her boots. More than once she nearly stumbled. More than once she refused his help. Pride seemed woven into her as deeply as the copper strands of hair frozen against her shoulders. The colony lights finally emerged through the storm like distant stars. Soft amber circles glowing through sheets of white. The sight made Ethan breathe easier. The outer gate slid open with a mechanical groan. Warm air rushed outward as they entered the airlock chamber. Frost immediately began melting from their clothing. Water dripped onto the metal floor. For a moment, neither moved. The silence felt strange after hours of wind. The alien woman's golden eyes scanned every corner of the facility. Security cameras, maintenance drones, emergency power cells. She observed everything, calculated everything. Ethan noticed. Soldiers looked at rooms that way. Leaders did too. The inner door opened. Heat rolled across the corridor. Soft lighting reflected from steel walls worn smooth by years of use. The scent of recycled air mixed with coffee and machine oil. Home. Ethan pointed toward a nearby medical station. Sit. She remained standing. That was not a request, he added. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Then, to his surprise, she obeyed. The medical scanner swept across her body with a faint blue glow. Data streamed across the monitor. Elevated stress levels. Mild hypothermia. Exhaustion. Several untreated injuries. Nothing immediately life-threatening. Ethan released a breath he had not realized he was holding. The alien watched the screen carefully. You trust machines with your health? She asked. Her translator was functioning better now. Her voice carried authority even when weakened. Ethan smiled faintly. Most days they are more reliable than people. Something resembling amusement flickered across her face before disappearing. He retrieved a container of heated vegetable stew from a storage unit and placed it on the table. Steam curled upward into the warm air. The smell filled the room instantly. The alien stared at it, then at him. Why? Ethan looked confused. Because people need food. No. Her gaze sharpened. Why help me? The question lingered between them. Outside, the storm rattled the reinforced windows. Inside, the colony hummed quietly around them. Ethan leaned against the counter. Where I come from, leaving someone to freeze is not considered acceptable behavior. Even an enemy? He paused. Interesting choice of word. Enemy. Not stranger. Not traveler. Enemy. I do not know who you are, he said carefully. That makes judgment difficult. The alien lowered her eyes toward the steaming bowl. For the first time, uncertainty softened the hard edges of her expression. She picked up the spoon. Slowly, cautiously, as if kindness itself might be some kind of trap. Ethan returned to his workbench and pretended not to watch. A few minutes later, he heard the faint sound of the empty bowl being placed back onto the table. Outside, the storm continued to rage across the frozen world. Inside, for the first time since finding her beneath the snow, the alien woman looked less like someone preparing for a battle and more like someone trying to remember what safety felt like. The storm finally began to weaken sometime after midnight. By morning, only thin ribbons of snow drifted across the frozen valley beyond the colony windows. Pale sunlight filtered through the clouds, casting long silver reflections across the ice fields. Ethan woke to the familiar sound of machinery cycling through its daily diagnostics. Pumps hummed beneath the floor panels. Environmental monitors chirped softly. The colony was old, but it still knew how to survive. He stepped into the main corridor carrying 2 steaming mugs. One smelled of coffee. The other contained a mild herbal blend commonly used for visitors whose biology did not react well to caffeine. He stopped when he reached the observation deck. The alien woman stood beside the glass. Her posture was straighter than the day before. Stronger. The thermal cloak still rested across her shoulders. Beyond the window, the endless white landscape stretched toward the horizon. For several seconds, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Ethan handed her the second mug. She accepted it carefully. You knew I would be here, she asked. There are only 3 places people go when they wake up in this colony. Ethan replied. The workshop, the kitchen, or the window. A faint curve touched her lips. It vanished quickly, but he noticed it. She looked back outside. Your species builds homes in strange places. Ethan followed her gaze. That is what everyone says. And yet you stay. Someone has to keep the generators running. Her golden eyes shifted toward him. That is not the real reason. Ethan laughed softly into his coffee. Smart. Very smart. Maybe not. The conversation ended there, but the tension that had existed between them since their meeting seemed weaker now. Not gone. Just changing. Later that morning, Ethan worked inside the maintenance bay while she observed from a nearby chair. Tools lay scattered across a steel workbench. Diagnostic screens glowed blue against the walls. The scent of heated metal filled the room. Every so often she asked questions. Precise questions. Technical questions. Questions most travelers would never think to ask. She understood power distribution systems, navigation arrays, emergency communications architecture, far more than she should have. Ethan noticed that too. You are not a merchant, he said eventually. She looked up from a schematic display. No. Not a scientist either. No. He tightened a bolt and glanced at her. Military. The room became very quiet. The distant hum of the reactor seemed louder suddenly. Her gaze lowered toward the floor. Something like that. Ethan nodded once and returned to his work. No pressure. No interrogation. No demand for explanations. The response seemed to surprise her more than the question itself. Hours passed. By afternoon, sunlight reflected brilliantly from the snowfields outside. The colony felt warmer, livelier, less lonely. At one point, a maintenance drone malfunctioned and began spinning in confused circles around the workshop. Ethan spent nearly 10 minutes chasing it before finally catching it against a storage crate. The alien watched the entire disaster unfold. Then a sound escaped her. A laugh. Low. Genuine. Completely unexpected. Ethan froze with the struggling drone under one arm. For a brief second, the hard edges around her seemed to disappear. She looked younger somehow. Lighter. The moment lasted only an instant before she regained her composure. Yet something had changed. They both knew it. Outside, the frozen world remained harsh and unforgiving. Inside, among old machines and worn steel walls, 2 strangers from different civilizations sat together in the quiet warmth of a forgotten colony. And for the first time, neither of them seemed eager to leave. 3 days passed beneath pale skies and drifting snow. The colony settled into an unfamiliar rhythm. The generators hummed. The maintenance drones wandered their assigned routes. The frozen valley glittered beneath weak sunlight that never seemed to fully warm the world. And somehow, the silence inside the station no longer felt empty. Ethan noticed it first during breakfast. Normally, he ate alone at a small metal table near the kitchen viewport. A quick meal, a few maintenance reports, then work. Now there was a second chair occupied across from him. The alien woman remained quiet most mornings, studying the landscape beyond the glass while steam curled from her cup. Yet her presence altered everything. The room felt lived in. One afternoon, they stood together inside the communications tower. Ethan balanced on a ladder while replacing a damaged relay module. The tower stretched nearly 50 feet above the colony roofline. Frost covered every support beam. Through the panoramic windows, endless white plains rolled toward distant mountains. The alien examined a diagnostic display nearby. Her fingers moved confidently across the controls. Your signal efficiency is only 87%. Ethan glanced down. You say that like it is bad. It is bad. It was 71% last week. Her expression suggested she was not impressed. Ethan laughed and returned to his work. The sound echoed softly through the tower. A few moments later, she surprised him. You enjoy repairing things. He tightened another connector. Somebody has to. That is not an answer. He considered the question. Outside, snow drifted against the glass. Inside, the old relay system clicked steadily back to life. Machines are honest, he said eventually. If something breaks, there is usually a reason. Find a reason. Fix the problem. Life would be easier if people worked that way. For several seconds, she remained silent. Then she looked away from the display. People are more complicated. Ethan smiled. Exactly. Later that evening, the station lights dimmed briefly as the solar grid shifted into nighttime conservation mode. Amber illumination washed across the corridors. Long shadows stretched along the walls. Ethan found her standing once again beside the observation window. The frozen world outside glowed beneath moonlight. Stars burned brightly across the black sky. Thousands of them. Maybe millions. They stood together without speaking. The silence felt natural now. Comfortable. Eventually she broke it. On my world, stars are symbols of destiny. Ethan folded his arms. On Earth they are mostly symbols of hope. She turned toward him slightly. Hope. The idea that something exists beyond whatever problem is in front of you. Her golden eyes reflected the distant starlight. For the first time, sadness touched her expression. Deep sadness. Old sadness. Hope is dangerous. Ethan considered that, then shook his head. Only when people stop believing in it. The words lingered between them. She looked back toward the stars. Her reflection shimmered faintly across the glass. Strong. Intelligent. Yet somehow tired. As though she had carried responsibilities for far too long. Ethan wanted to ask questions. About her past. About who she really was. About why someone with military training and leadership instincts had been alone in the middle of a lethal storm. But he did not. Trust was not built through interrogation. It was built through patience. Outside, a shooting star crossed the horizon. A brief streak of silver against the darkness. Both of them watched it disappear. Neither spoke afterward. Yet somewhere in that quiet moment, standing beneath an alien sky at the edge of known space, two lives that should never have crossed paths began to understand each other in ways neither could fully explain. The sixth morning arrived beneath clear skies. For the first time since the storm, sunlight reached the valley without interruption. The snowfields shimmered like polished crystal. Long bands of light stretched across the frozen plains beyond the colony walls. Ethan stood inside the communications room, reviewing overnight system reports when a sharp warning tone interrupted the quiet. One beep, then another, then a cascade of alerts across the central display. His smile disappeared immediately. Signal activity. External. Powerful. Unidentified. He moved closer to the screen. Several narrow energy signatures flashed across the sensor grid before vanishing again. Not natural. Not local. Ships. Far away, but approaching. Ethan felt a knot form in his stomach. The colony rarely received visitors. The sector sat too far from major trade routes. Most months passed without a single transmission. Yet whoever was out there possessed technology far more advanced than anything normally seen in frontier space. He heard footsteps behind him. The alien woman entered the room. One glance at the display was enough. Her expression changed instantly. The calm curiosity he had grown accustomed to vanished behind something older, sharper, professional. She stepped toward the screen. "How long?" she asked. Ethan noticed she did not ask what the signals were. She already knew. If they maintained current velocity, maybe 12 hours. Her jaw tightened slightly. Not fear. Recognition. Ethan folded his arms. "Friends." Silence answered him. That silence told him everything. For several seconds neither spoke. The room filled with the soft hum of equipment and the distant vibration of the colony reactor. Finally she exhaled slowly. "I should leave." Ethan blinked. "Leave? Before they arrive? Why?" Her golden eyes met his. There was genuine conflict there now. Not suspicion. Not distance. Conflict. "Because you helped me. If they find me here, your life becomes complicated." Ethan laughed softly. "My life became complicated the moment I dragged an unidentified alien out of a snowstorm." For the first time, she did not smile at one of his jokes. That worried him more than the sensor warnings. The hours that followed passed strangely. Ethan completed maintenance tasks while she assisted without being asked. Neither mentioned the approaching ships. Neither needed to. The knowledge remained between them. Unspoken. Heavy. By late afternoon, they found themselves once again standing near the observation window overlooking the valley. The sky glowed pale blue above endless white snow. Far beyond the mountains, tiny flashes of light occasionally appeared near the horizon. Approaching vessels descending through the upper atmosphere. The alien watched them carefully. Ethan studied her reflection in the glass. "You still have not told me your name." The question lingered in the air. Days had passed since they first met. Somehow he had never asked. Or perhaps he had chosen not to. She remained silent for several moments. Then she turned toward him. "Aurelia." The name sounded elegant. Ancient somehow. Ethan nodded. "Good to finally meet you properly, Aurelia." Something softened in her expression. A small crack in armor that had been carefully maintained for a very long time. "You are a strange human, Ethan. I hear that a lot." Outside, another distant flash crossed the horizon. Closer now. Much closer. Aurelia lowered her gaze briefly before looking back toward the approaching lights. "In my experience," she said quietly, "people only help others when they expect something in return." Ethan followed her gaze toward the frozen wilderness. "Then you have met the wrong people." The answer seemed to strike her harder than he intended. She looked away immediately, yet he noticed the change. The uncertainty, the questioning, as though a belief she had carried for years was beginning to fracture. Beyond the colony walls, starships continued their silent descent through the evening sky. And for the first time since arriving, Aurelia looked less concerned about being found and more concerned about what would happen after. The first ship appeared shortly after sunset, a bright silver point descending through the darkening sky. Then another followed, and another. Soon half a dozen lights moved above the distant mountains, their engines glowing like falling stars. The colony sensors tracked every movement across the central display. Advanced, organized, purposeful. Ethan stood in the communications room, watching the readings update every few seconds. The vessels were not merely passing through the sector. They were searching, specifically searching. Aurelia stood beside him, silent. Her gaze remained fixed on the sensor map. "They found the emergency beacon from my escape pod," she said at last. Ethan nodded. That explained their precision. The room fell quiet again. Outside, darkness settled across the frozen valley. Snow reflected pale moonlight across the endless landscape. The colony lights glowed warmly against the cold. Small, fragile, human. A warning alarm suddenly interrupted the silence. Sharp, urgent. Ethan turned immediately toward the main console. His pulse quickened. Another signal had appeared. Not from orbit. From the surface. Less than 3 miles away. Moving rapidly toward the colony. "That is not one of the ships," he said. Aurelia's expression darkened. She already understood. Whoever was approaching had arrived earlier. Quietly. The next few minutes passed in focused activity. Ethan checked perimeter sensors while Aurelia reviewed external camera feeds. Wind swept across the snowfields outside. Shadows moved between abandoned mining structures scattered throughout the valley. Then one camera captured a brief image. A vehicle. Fast. Armored. Closing the distance. Ethan looked toward Aurelia. Friends. She shook her head immediately. No. The answer came too quickly to be uncertain. For the first time since he had met her, concern appeared openly in her eyes. Not for herself. For him. She stepped away from the monitor. You must deactivate the colony transponder. Ethan frowned. Why? Because they will identify you as the person who sheltered me. I did shelter you. Exactly. The words struck harder than expected. Ethan stared at her for several seconds. Then he crossed the room and calmly disabled the external beacon. The colony instantly disappeared from long-range civilian scans. Aurelia watched him, confused. You understand the risk? She asked quietly. Ethan finished entering the shutdown sequence. I understood the risk when I offered you food. Outside, the approaching vehicle continued advancing through the valley. Its position marker crawled steadily across the sensor screen. 1 mile, then less. Aurelia lowered her gaze briefly. Something emotional flickered across her features. Gratitude. Regret. Perhaps both. You should not be doing this. Ethan leaned against the console. You keep saying that. Because it is true. Maybe. He looked toward the frozen darkness beyond the window. But I am tired of people acting like kindness is a strategic mistake. The room became silent. Even the machinery seemed quieter somehow. Aurelia studied him as though seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as a human. Not as a stranger. As a person. Outside, distant lights appeared across the snow. The approaching vehicle had entered visual range. Its headlights cut through drifting ice crystals. The search was ending. Decisions would soon become unavoidable. Yet something had already changed. Aurelia slowly stepped closer to the observation window. Her reflection shimmered against the glass. Powerful. Intelligent. Burdened. For days she had planned to leave before anyone arrived. To disappear. To protect the man who had helped her. Now she understood that Ethan had made his choice long ago. Not because of politics. Not because of loyalty. Simply because someone needed help. Beyond the colony walls, engines echoed faintly across the frozen valley. The night was moving toward a reckoning. But inside the warm glow of the station, one truth had become impossible for Aurelia to ignore. In a galaxy where every favor carried a price, Ethan had asked for nothing. The vehicle reached the colony perimeter just after midnight. Snow swirled around its headlights as it came to a silent stop beyond the outer fence. For several seconds nothing happened. No movement. No transmissions. Only the sound of wind brushing across frozen steel. Ethan and Aurelia watched from the observation deck. The colony lights reflected faintly across the glass. Then the vehicle door opened. 3 figures emerged. Tall. Armored. Their silver uniforms shimmered beneath the moonlight. Each moved with disciplined precision. Not soldiers preparing for battle. Guardians carrying responsibility. One of them stepped forward and activated a beacon. A narrow column of blue light rose into the sky. Immediately, the orbital ships responded. Bright signals flashed across the heavens above the valley. Aurelia closed her eyes briefly. She knew what came next. Ethan glanced toward her. You recognize them. It was not a question. She nodded slowly. Yes. And they recognize you. Another pause. Longer this time. Then she faced him fully. The station lights illuminated her copper hair and golden eyes. For the first time since their meeting, she allowed the last remaining walls around herself to fall. There is something I should have told you. Ethan remained silent. I am not a pilot. I am not military. Her voice carried no pride. Only honesty. I am Aurelia Varen, first sovereign of the Solarian Dominion. The words settled into the room. Ethan blinked once. Then twice. Outside, distant starships glowed above the frozen horizon. Inside, the old colony hummed softly around them. He looked at her for several seconds. You are a queen. Aurelia gave the smallest nod. Yes. Ethan considered this revelation with remarkable calm. That explains why you keep trying to give orders. For one stunned heartbeat she simply stared at him. Then she laughed. A real laugh. Warm and unguarded. The tension shattered instantly. Even Aurelia seemed surprised by the sound. Ethan smiled. There she is. The laughter faded slowly. In its place came something more difficult. Emotion. Gratitude. Sadness. Neither knew exactly how to describe it. Outside, the armored figures had reached the colony gate. They waited patiently rather than forcing entry. Aurelia noticed that too. Her people knew she had been found, yet they waited for her decision. Another silence passed between them, this one heavier than all the others. Finally, Aurelia stepped toward the window. Snow drifted through the moonlight beyond the glass. For most of my life, she said quietly, every person I met wanted something. Influence, status, access, information. Her reflection shimmered beside Ethan's. When I escaped, I expected the same from you. Ethan folded his arms. You were wrong. I know. The answer came immediately. No hesitation. No pride. Just truth. Aurelia lowered her gaze briefly. You saved my life without knowing who I was. You would have done the same. She looked at him. The sadness in her eyes deepened. No. Ethan frowned. No. A week ago, I would not have. The admission hung in the air. Honest. Painful. Transformative. Outside, the waiting delegation remained motionless beneath the falling snow. Aurelia watched them for a moment. Then she looked back toward the worn corridors, the old workshop, the kitchen table where they shared quiet meals, and the observation window where two strangers had spent hours watching distant stars. None of it was grand. None of it was royal. Yet somehow it had changed her more than any palace ever had. Beyond the colony walls, an empire waited for its ruler. Inside the station, a simple human engineer stood beside her. And for the first time in many years, Aurelia found herself questioning which of those worlds truly held the greater power. Dawn arrived slowly across the frozen world. Pale gold light spilled over the mountains and painted the snowfields in soft colors of silver and amber. The storm season seemed distant now. The valley stood quiet beneath a clear sky. Outside the colony, the waiting delegation remained exactly where they had been through the night. Patient, respectful, loyal. Ethan stood alone in the workshop finishing a routine calibration on a damaged maintenance drone. The familiar clicks of tools against metal echoed softly through the room. It felt strangely important to keep working, to continue something normal while everything else was changing. Footsteps approached from the corridor. He looked up. Aurelia stood in the doorway. She wore a formal cloak that one of the visiting attendants had delivered earlier that morning. Deep bronze fabric shimmered faintly beneath the workshop lights. For the first time, she looked every bit the ruler she claimed to be. Yet her golden eyes carried the same warmth he had seen beside the kitchen table and observation window. 4.